Episode 3. In the first two episodes, we had seen the start of the story of Europe and Napoleon, looking at how the military prodigy would be able to develop, as well as some of the factors that had gone into his success. We had seen some of the events that had constituted his time in power, some of the battles he would come to take part in, and some of the consequences of those battles. We started with a look at the world of Corsica from 1769 and the experiences the island would go through as time moved forward. We had also looked at the young Napoleon's life, from his stretch in education at École Militaire and the flashes of what was to come that would show themselves at various points in time there, to the regions that Napoleon would pass through at this early stage of his life, regions and areas the likes of Valence and Auxonne. We had also looked at the influence of Pascal Paoli, the man who had occupied a role in the life of Napoleon and that of his father. Paoli would wish Corsica to secede. Pasquale Paoli had led a life that had seen many events take place. At some point in time he would find himself exiled to Britain. At another point in time he would find himself involved in events that would have ramifications for him. An expedition to Sardinia in which Napoleon was also involved. Some other point in time would also see Corsica under control by some of his supporters. He had been born around 1725 and would live a fairly long life, seeing him wear several roles that included those of the military leader as well as those of the statesman. Some of the events that would occur during his lifetime would include actions like the Battle of Ponte Novo. He had come to interact with the Napoleon family several times, though some souring of the relationship would occur at another and would take place around the time that he would be exiled to England. Pasquale Paoli had been born into a family in which he wouldn't be the only son, and his father had been involved in the Corsican nationalist movement. Several issues had surrounded the Genoan government in control of Corsica at the time, and a rebellion would find itself taking place in the year 1729. His father would go into exile at some point in time, and along with him would be at least one of his sons, Pasquale. Several episodes would happen during this period that would have a bearing on the future. Pasquale would find himself involved in several events during this period. He would eventually find himself as General-in-Chief of Corsica, commander of all resistance. Several other events would occur in the wake of this one, and would include a constitution and many other modifications. He would find himself in England after some of these events, where many other events would occur. Included in them was his meetings with numerous individuals who would continue to play a role in his life. Changes would transpire that would allow Paoli to return home, during which time he would find himself become the president. He would implement many changes within the Republic. Other events would occur during this period comprising the War of the Austrian Succession. 1793. Events would occur that would improve Napoleon's standing with individuals like Augustin Robespierre. For one, Napoleon would be involved in events that would surround the port of Toulon and attempts to recover it. He occupied the position of artillery commander of the Republican forces that had been given some responsibility in regard to Toulon. He made changes that would lead to the success of the attempt. Bonaparte would also find himself involved in an event that would have a bearing for Paoli, the French expedition to Sardinia. By the end of events, Corsica would be controlled by Paoli's supporters. Several promotions would follow Napoleon. One of them would see him become artillery commander of the Army of Italy, his plans proving effective and granting a triumph. 1793 would also see the siege of Toulon, a battle that would play a noteworthy role in creating the reputation of Napoleon. It would see the destruction of several ships, as well as the involvement of several individuals, amongst whom were the likes of Sir Sidney Smith, Samuel Hood, and Charles O'Hara, the last one of whom would be captured. Events would eventually see the entry of convention troops into Toulon. This would occur around mid to late December. 1793 would see the siege of Toulon occur. It would see the involvement of soldiers of the French Republic, royalist rebels, and soldiers from Anglo-Spanish troops in a tactical and strategized struggle that would take place over the course of months, involve several casualties and many backs and forths in a clash that would have important ramifications. Strategies and plans would also emerge over the course of the battles as circumstances changed, positions and strategic points were achieved, men were captured, negotiations were opened, and new batteries were built. At some point in time, the the French would launch an attack on Little Gibraltar. They would gain new locations, but this progress would not be without cost for the French. The events that would occur in the siege of Toulon would be important for several reasons. Not least of all was the tactical importance that the port of Toulon played, as well as the ships that had been present there, ships that would eventually find themselves being destroyed. Before the events that had happened, several occurrences had taken place, including the arrest of several individuals. Some of these episodes would lead to unrest. The unrest would occur across several French cities. Toulon would see numerous episodes occur in it and also see the Jacobin Club evicted, the rise of the Royalists, and the entrance of troops in support from the Anglo-Spanish fleet. This would see the involvement of a man known as Baron Xavier Lebré d'Imbert and British and Spanish admirals, including Sir Samuel Hood. Several events would occur which would lead to the rising of the French royal flag. Amidst some of the events that would occur at Toulon, the fort would be given over to the British Navy. Conflict over the port with all its importance would also come about. This conflict would see the involvement of many individuals from various places and with different agendas. Into this situation, with the escalating tension and with many things riding on it, would enter the French Republicans along with several notable individuals. Amongst them were Jean-François Cartos, Napoleon Bonaparte, and Jean-François Cornu de la Poype. In the course of events that would occur, Napoleon would be involved in several events, including those that would see the French build several batteries that were there to challenge those that were in possession and in use by the British. The events would also see him involved in some of the attacks, which would eventually see him injured in the fighting at one point in time. Several other individuals would also play a part or role in the events that would unfold over the course of the siege. Many events would occur which would call for changes in tact when things went wrong for one or the other side. It even saw changes in personnel over the course of the siege. The eventual result of the siege would be French Republican victory. But many other events would occur during the course of the siege. We will take some time to explore a bit of the events as well as their importance to the overall wars. We will also look at how they would come to play a role in the overall outcomes of the siege. And in addition, explore the role that Napoleon would come to play in the events. Toulon would be an important region for several reasons, including its ships and other factors. It would be especially important for the Republicans in some of what they aimed to achieve. By the end of the events that would occur in the episode prior to the siege, Toulon would raise the royal flag. It is thus how we arrive at events that would occur during the siege and would see the reaction of the Republic to the events. Toulon would see the arrival of several troops, amongst whom were the troops under leaders like Jean-François Cornu de la Poype. On the British side, the batteries that were there were Fort Mulgrave, St. Philippe, St. Come, and Saint-Charles, and they would collectively be called Little Gibraltar. The French, on the other hand, initially had the mountain, but with time and through the efforts of the French, amongst whom would be Napoleon playing an important part and active role, some more batteries would be added to it. These batteries would include those called sans-culottes, Jacobin, Men Without Fear, and Chassé-Caking. The present Bonaparte would make moves to acquire more equipment. This would be aided by supplies and additional men from the surrounding population, which was in part thanks to the influence of some of Bonaparte's friends. Another event that would occur would be the sending of a letter of appeal to the Committee of Public Safety by Napoleon, in which he asked for help. He would spend some time planning and coming up with ideas. Some of the plans which would involve actions that were designed to reduce and block some of the supplies for Toulon, as usually occurred in a siege. In addition to some of the actions that Bonaparte had done above, Bonaparte would also find himself playing an active part in the fighting. He would even find himself being injured at a later point in time. Events would see the replacement of Cartos by François-Amédée d'Oppet, but he would in turn be replaced by de Gamier, a man who had been active within the French army for years. De Gamier had been born in 1738. In his career, he would find himself associated with naval batteries at least one point in time. Under him, several batteries would be added and constructed, and conflicts would continue. At a point in time, the Anglo-Neapolitans would be able to attack, capturing a battery. A counterattack from Bonaparte's side would follow. During some of these events, a British general would be captured. He would go by the name of General Charles O'Hara, and his capture would lead or at least contribute to several events. Amongst some of the events would be negotiations. The Republicans would attack in December during the night, leading to the capture of several positions, but in the fighting Bonaparte would be injured. Evacuation would be the decision of the Allies. This would also involve a decision to take steps in order to destroy ships that were present, which had so much importance to the French. Without the ships, their challenge of British naval power would be at least weakened. The French were aware of this importance. Events would see the involvement of several individuals, amongst who were people the likes of Longara, Charles O'Hara, and Smith. Though some challenges would be encountered during some of the events. At some point in time, the ship HMS Vulcan would be utilized as a fire ship as it was set to the flame. Other ships that would be targeted during this period would include a ship that had been previously captured. Added to this as well were some French ships that found themselves present there during the events that had occurred. Among some of them would be the Montreal. Some of the ships of the British side that would be present and play somewhat of an active role in the events that would occur would include the Britannia and the Union. Things would see several casualties in an event that would see shots fired and structures and buildings set aflame. At one point in time, the Iris would explode, and in the events surrounding it, several individuals would lose their lives on the ship Union. Also present during some of these events would be Republican prisoners who would play an active role in some of the proceedings of the episode. Forces against the Republicans would at some point in time turn their attention towards the old arsenal, aiming to set ships within it also aflame, but they would be stopped by several factors, including the presence of Republican forces. Smith, who would be present and involved in some of these events, would at some point in time decide to withdraw from Toulon. Several individuals would be able to leave and evacuate from Toulon. Numerous changes would occur in the aftermath, including Napoleon's departure to take up a new role. Plebiscite February 1800. Several other changes would follow that would increase Napoleon's power. Regional revolts existed during this time as well, and they would be responded to. Other changes would also take form, some of them to do with newspapers, as well as some to do with taxes, finances, and other issues. Other aspects of France would also undergo some level of change. Some period in the course of events would see Italy see the presence of Bonaparte as he and an army would find their way there under him. This event would be followed by a successful capturing of Milan by the French that followed months after, around June. The course of events during this time and the battles that occurred would lead Austria to sign an armistice and would have an impact on northern Italy. Other events would occur at Hohenlinden following the reignition of conflicts between the French and Austrians. A treaty by the name of the Treaty of Luneville would eventually be signed in the year that followed. 1802, March, signing of Treaty of Amiens. Battle of Austerlitz, 1805. This incident would occur in the wake of years of war on the European continent, which had seen many prominent conflicts, amongst which were the Battle of Marengo. The Battle of Marengo had ended with French victory. It would involve several individuals. It would see fierce fighting, and would also see the participation of the French Republic, on whose side were people the likes of Napoleon Bonaparte, Louis Desaix, and Jean Lannes. It also saw the Habsburg monarchy, on whose side was Michael Melis. At the end of the fighting there would be dialogues, which would see the involvement of Melis, and would see the Austrians withdraw from some of the regions they were in. Other battles had also occurred in the time between episodes. Several coalitions had been formed in the time that had passed, and some of the wars of the coalitions had been fought with varying outcomes for each war. The first war of the coalition had seen many battles. Each subsequent war after the War of the First Coalition would see numerous nations take up arms against Napoleon and the French. Amongst the nations that would be involved would be Austria, Great Britain, Spain, the Kingdom of Naples, the Ottoman Empire, Russia, and several others. Some of these battles would see significant individuals take the center stage. 1803 had seen the renewal of that continual fight. The Battle of Austerlitz would be a battle that would prove important even after it was fought. It would be part of the War of the Third Coalition. It would see the involvement of several troops, many casualties, and tactical and strategic moves. Moves that would at times work but at other times fail, with consequences. Many soldiers would be present during the fighting, which would see fierce conflict, with some of the soldiers having been involved in other battles before it. Also present would be leaders who would also have the experience of previous battles that had been fought not only in these Napoleonic wars, but in other wars before them. The battle here would have important repercussions for the overall wars, and many important events would occur in its aftermath, including treaties that would be signed. Other significant events had preceded this battle, including those that would occur during the Ulm campaign with its many outcomes. The Battle of Austerlitz would see many actions by Napoleon that would lure the Allies into acting in ways that would, with time and with new perspectives, prove to be actions that would work against their favor. Some of these actions would indicate to the Allies that the French army was weaker than it actually was. To aid with this effort, Napoleon would employ many tactics that would be coordinated amongst several individuals. Over the course of the battles as well, several people would be captured and would become prisoners. The Battle of Austerlitz would see numerous troops and numerous central figures as well as many casualties. Napoleon's strategies would be very impactful on the outcomes of the battle. Probably without them, a victory would have been hard to achieve. The victory would consequentially be remembered and remarked upon for years following its events. This was added to the impacts the victory would have and the changes that would come in its wake, including territorial ones, as well as widespread changes that would come to impact both those present at the conflicts and those that were absent. Some of the decisions from the treaty that would come from it would see the Russian troops be able to come back home from where they had been situated. It would occur in 1805. The fighting would see many strategic acts that were made in order to draw the attack of the Allies. And in its aftermath, misgivings would form in the minds of certain individuals, amongst whom was Emperor Francis. After it, the Peace of Pressburg would come to be. Prior to this Peace of Pressburg, other treaties had been signed, included amongst which were the Treaty of Campo Formio and the Treaty of Luneville. But the peace would be destined to be broken in the future. Many factors would remain preventing peace from being attained. In addition to these changes was the Confederation of the Rhine. In the period before the battle, Austria had recently implemented changes within its army, and at the helm of some of these changes would be a man known as Karl Mack. The Allies' numbers would be bolstered by arriving troops. Napoleon would be planning for a potential invasion of England, something that wouldn't eventually happen. The army that would be amassed would be known as the Army of England or the Armée d'Angleterre, and would be consisted of several numerous individuals with various origins and stories constituting their lives. During the period prior to the battle, things would change, and Austria and Russia would be a concern for Napoleon that he would be forced to address. Ulm would be a fortress of interest in the events that would follow, and maneuvers made by Napoleon and his forces would eventually result in the capture of several Austrian troops in a maneuver that would yield a lot for the French. In the Battle of Trafalgar, which had involved the French, Spanish, and the British had gained a victory which would have several impacts. Some of the impacts on the naval front of the battle between the powers. The British Vice Admiral Horatio Nelson would gain some acclaim from the events of the battle. Involved in the events that would follow some of the events before would be a man known as Mikhail Kutuzov, who would be made commander-in-chief. He would communicate and discuss with several individuals on the Allied side as he made moves, commenting on some of the weaknesses in the plans that had been made, and making an analysis on the scenario that was at end, acting in light of the information he would gather in Summits. Murat had made a ceasefire proposal, and a man by the name of Bagration would be directed to accept the proposal by the commander-in-chief of the Russians and the Allies' troops in a move that had some greater intentions behind it. Mistakes would be made on the French side. One in particular would be made by Murat. Napoleon would, however, have a plan, one that he would put into action. Amongst the parts of the plan would be convincing the Allies that the French were weaker than they were and drawing them in. This would be enhanced by personal performances by Napoleon himself, which would add to the picture of weakness when he had a meeting with Prince Peter Dolgorukov. These actions would contribute to the Allies' decision to attack, and this would lead to the eventual outcome that it did. The treaty that would be signed after would signal territorial impacts and lead to many changes that would come to affect several individuals across a large territory. Other changes that would come as a result of the battle or would be contributed to by some of its outcomes would include the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire and the establishment of the Confederation of the Rhine. Prior to the battle, several other events had occurred throughout the European continent, with many struggles occurring over a space of time. Amongst some of these battles would be battles like the Battle of Valmy, the Siege of Mainz, the Battle of Arlon, and the Siege of Toulon. These had come to constitute some of the battles of the War of the First Coalition. The War of the Second Coalition would see battles like the Battle of Novi, the Battle of Castricum, the Battle of Montebello, the Battle of Marengo, and several others involving numerous events and individuals. Now the War of the Third Coalition was occurring and had seen events like the Battle of Ulm, the Battle of Caldiero, and others. The Battle of Austerlitz would be amongst the battles of the War of the Third Coalition and would be an important battle in the whole Napoleonic Wars. Battle of Jena-Auerstedt, 1806. It ended in victory for the French forces, in a conflict that would see fierce fighting and would also result in important changes in territory. The aftermath of the battles would also see massive changes and promotions for certain people, including Marshal Davout, who would gain some acclaim through his actions in the battle. Some of the changes that would occur here would remain in effect until well into the future. Certain aspects of the battle would be important, including issues to do with information and how it was to be communicated within the army. Such factors would play a role in defining the outcomes of the important battles. Other aspects of the battle would be affected by weaknesses within the Prussian army that would find themselves manifesting at several points in time within the fight, whether it was a loss at some point or the decisive mistake at another. Some of these factors would add up and play their roles throughout the battle in a concerted and additive effort that would end in the defeat of the Prussians and a triumph for the French. The French, on the other hand, had advantages that would work in their favor and grant them important benefits, allowing them to overcome the enemy in a situation they probably might not have won had it not been for some of these advantages. At some points in time, the Prussian forces would be slow to react, leading to massive losses, and Napoleon at these points in time would be able to gain important victories. At some point in time as well, some of the troops under Davout and Bernadotte would be asked to join those of Napoleon. It was during an attempt to join Napoleon that Davout and his men would enter a situation that would have important repercussions on many outcomes. They would come to face the Prussian main force, a force that Napoleon had thought he had fought. Outnumbered and facing these forces, with many men before him, along with several notable individuals on the Prussian side, including individuals like Friedrich Wilhelm Karl von Schmettau, Davout would be able to win a victory that would win him some compliments in the battle that would be known as the Battle of Auerstedt. Over the course of the battles that would see several casualties in a battle for which many locations would be important, and in which strategy, efficiency, adaptability, and speed of response would play a part in determining the outcomes. A characteristic of Napoleon that would at times shine through this battle and in many others was the way Napoleon would be able to adapt himself to different situations and respond quickly to developing situations. By the end of the Battle of Jena, the Prussians would have lost many men, and the French would have won a considerable victory. Several individuals on the Prussian side would be captured and kept as prisoners. The battle at Jena would start, and some of the initial actions of the battle were French attacks on Prussian forces. One point in time would see Ney in trouble and receiving severe attacks from the Prussians, a position from which he would have to be rescued from, simultaneously weakening parts of the French army. The Battle of Auerstedt would end in the withdrawal of Prussians. It had seen the involvement of several forces in a fierce battle and had also seen several significant individuals, amongst whom were the Prince of the Orange, the Duke of Brunswick, General Etienne Gudin, Blücher, Hassenhausen, and several other individuals. Several troops would be lost in the conflicts, many of them from the Prussian side. Several other events would ensue in the future, including the Battle of Halle, the Battle of Prenzlau, and the capturing of numerous Prussian columns. The surrender of Blücher would eventually come sometime in November, amidst several other events that would occur after the Battle of Jena-Auerstedt, events like the Battle of Lübeck. Different events would also happen in the future, including battles, conflicts, and sieges that would determine the future of Europe, France, and the nations that would be involved in the wars, and ultimately shape history as more and more people were drawn into action, and more events occurred that would have their own nuances. Events that would include their own strategies, mistakes, errors, victories, losses, territorial gains, and casualties. But the battle that had seen the likes of Ney, Davout, Hassenhausen, Blücher, Brunswick, the Prince of Orange, and several others, and had seen fierce fighting between the Prussian and the French forces. Seeing several events that would come to affect numerous people over a long period of time and having consequences that would last some time, had come to an end. That marks the end of the third episode into Napoleon Bonaparte. In the next episode, we will look at events like the 1807 Battle of Friedland. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, please take the time to subscribe to the channel for more episodes into other topics and to catch the next episode in the series.